I'm Susanna Baruch. I'm the Executive Director of the Petrie-Flom Center, and before I start introducing our panel, who are making their way up, I do want to thank the HLS teams responsible for events and catering and bartending and IT and facilities, because these events are complicated and we couldn't do it without them. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So we invited 5 key people from our network to talk about their work in health law policy and bioethics, to talk a bit about their Petrie-Flom connections and experience, and if they so choose, to reflect on the current moment and consider and maybe tell us what might be coming our way in the future. So moderating this panel, I will sit down in a moment. Moderating will be my delightful predecessor, Carmel Shakar, now Assistant Clinical Professor of Law and Faculty Director of the Health Law and Policy Clinic. In addition to being a former Executive Director, Carmel is a former Petrie-Flom Student Fellow. Holly Fernandez-Lynch, now Associate Professor of Medical Ethics and Law at the Perelman School of Medicine and Carey Law School at the University of Pennsylvania, also a former Executive Director of the Petrie-Flom Center and a fellow as well. Christopher Robinson, who is the N. Neil Pike Scholar, Professor of Law and Public Health, and Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives in Law at BU, Boston University. We are lucky to have him at HLS as a Samuel Williston Visiting Professor of Law this semester. He's also a former fellow. David Tully, partner at Latham & Watkins and chair of the Litigation and Trial Department for Latham's Boston office. He is a treasured member of our advisory board. We're grateful for his service. And my colleague Alicia Ely Yeaman, who is the Senior Adjunct Lecturer on Health Policy and Management at the Chan School of Public Health, in addition to being Lecturer on Law at Harvard Law School and the Director of the Global Health and Rights Project at Petrie-Flom. Carmel, I'm going to leave it to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. So I'm going to explain the rules of the game, which is, as everybody who attends a Petrie-Flom event knows, Glenn runs a very, very tight ship when it comes to time. And he loves this beautiful timer very much. So I have set the timer that each of you has 6 minutes to reflect on Petrie-Flom and how it's influenced your career, where you see the field of health law going, with a 1-minute warning. And then for my audience, we are going to have our panelists talk, and then we're going to have a global Q&A at the end to have it feel like more of a discussion. So if you have a great question, just write it down in your notes app and we will get to you. So Holly, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. There's a large sign here that says "Speak into the microphone," so I will turn the microphone over to me. So I'm so thrilled to see everyone here at the 20th anniversary celebration for Petrie-Flom. I was the executive director until 2017, and as Susanna mentioned in her intro, I'm now at the University of Pennsylvania, where my work focuses on FDA, pharmaceutical policy, access to investigational medicines, rare disease drug development. I also do work related to clinical research ethics and regulation. And in that context, I focus on some areas of oversight that happen in the background. So I do work related to institutional review boards and trying to figure out how to make them work better. And I lead an organization called the AREO Consortium, which stands for Advancing Effective Research Ethics Oversight. And then more recently, I've been dabbling in psychedelics, law, and medicine, not in psychedelics themselves. I know. And so we were asked to kind of reflect on the past 20 years of Petrie-Flom and what the center has meant to us, and also talk a little bit about what's on our mind these days and what might be coming around the corner. So I have to just relay kind of a funny story. So 20 years ago, I was finishing my 2L year at the University of Pennsylvania, And we had seen an announcement about this new center that was going to be opening here at Harvard Law School. And one of my Penn Law professors said, "Hey, I saw this announcement, they're looking for an executive director, you should apply." And I said, "I am not graduated from law school yet, I'm just a 2L, why would I apply?" And he said, "Well, you never know, just throw your hat in the ring." So I did. It was a completely crazy thing to do. And so when I was a summer associate that year, Einar called, and we talked about the job for quite a while, probably 45 minutes or so, and then he said, "Well, if this works out, when could you start?" And I said, "Next year." And he said, "Well, now you can see why I need an executive director." So that at that time it didn't work out, but it made a lot more sense for me to join in the first cohort of academic fellows. And so I was with Glenn at that time, and we would have lunch together every day in the little yellow house at 23 Everett, work through our intellectual ideas. Glenn got me through a lot of imposter syndrome at the time. Einar helped me get my first book published. Started out as a law review article and then just kept growing and growing and growing. And Einar said, "Why don't you make it a book?" Which sounded pretty good, right? Better than chopping it into a couple of articles. So I then left the center, went off and practiced law for a while, and came back as executive director working with Glenn, really at a transition time for the organization. We started dabbling in grants and projects, which now have flourished. We launched the blog, and we really started to reach out more to the policy-making community and play a role in that space. So it was just a tremendous time, an opportunity for me to get established in the field. Glenn has been a tremendous mentor and colleague and supported me in really every way. So it's been just a delight to come back and see how the center has continued to flourish. And then just because our light is moving, I will transition quickly to talk a little bit about what's on my mind these days. And I'm sure it's the same thing that we just heard our keynote speakers talk about. Is on all of our minds in the health law and policy space, right? So the future of science funding, the decimation of the federal health and science oversight and administrative structure, the foregrounding of misinformation, the focus on cherry-picked experts, and the rejection of scientific expertise are real problems that we're facing as a nation. As I mentioned, I focus a lot of my time on FDA policy, and in that space, we're not doing any better than what we've heard about already this evening. So a huge loss of scientific expertise within FDA. More than 20% of their staff had been riffed or forced out of the agency, including high-level officials. We can talk about the appropriate type of political engagement at FDA, but we're seeing some of the crass political interference that we heard Sam talk about, and really a lack of a coherent framework for product approval other than, well, my friends made it and so that will get approved, and people I don't like didn't make it. And so, so we really need to get back to first principles at FDA about what products will be allowed on the market. And then to get to some of what Dr. Walensky was mentioning, there's a lot of double speak at the agency in terms of things that sound great, like transparency, minimization of conflicts of interest. We're going to promote efficiency. At the same time, the agency is having closed-door meetings with industry, not engaging their federal advisory committees, and really couldn't possibly be promoting efficiency without the core staff at their disposal. The other thing that kind of keeps me up these days is that throughout the course of FDA's history, as Lewis will tell us, we have seen all sorts of pushback against the role of the government in deciding which products should be allowed on the market and what should be left up to individual patients. We're seeing that again, right? We're seeing a lot of attention to the states, right? Montana has a right to try law on steroids right now. But in contrast to what we've seen in the past, FDA leadership itself seems to have fallen into this right to try libertarian mindset, rather than helping the public understand how important FDA is as a public health agency. And so my red light is flashing, I know what that means, and I will turn things over, I think, to Chris.
Well, thank you. When Glenn kicked us off this afternoon, he introduced himself as something of a lifer at Petrie-Flom, which evokes the notions of like a prison sentence, I think. But of course, it's not that. It's a wonderful relationship and an opportunity. But in some ways, I think those of us that were student fellows have an even special claim to have Petrie-Flom sort of running through our blood in our formative years. And so I was among that initial cohort even as a law student. And after being a student fellow, I graduated and went off to do some work in the space of health law. Heiner Elhag recruited me back to be the academic fellow for that sort of postdoc of 2 years for training and preparation to become a law professor. I then went off to my first baby lawyer job. And just a couple of years later, I was back as a visiting professor again, and the Petrie-Flom Center graciously co-hosted a conference on a co-edited book on blinding as a solution to bias. And then a few years later, I participated in co-convening and co-editing a book called Nudging Health that was one of the Petrie-Flom's annual landmark events. And then another couple years after that, I was a co-editor of another book on medical device regulation, and a couple years after that, more recently, we did a book on private law as health law. And when I published my own monograph, the Petrie-Flom Center graciously hosted a book event for that. Now I'm back teaching health law-related classes as a visiting professor here. You guys probably know all that, but what you may not realize is I actually named my dog Flomisha, and I have a small tattoo on the small of my back that is the shield of the Petrie-Flom Center. Okay, most of those facts are true, but that would make a great tattoo, right? It's a strong shield. I don't know if you have a choice in designing that at least, because it's a legitimate shield. It has been an amazing influence over 20 years on my career, and I am profoundly grateful. And as Heiner said, he set out consciously to build a generation of scholars in health law. But as many of you may know, law schools since the 1970s has been deeply influenced by economic thinking. And Heiner in particular taught me some fundamental principles that you really can't do legal analysis without thinking about things like marginal effects and opportunity costs. And so I just thought I'd disclose, Heiner, I came to law school intending to work in international human rights and try to prevent genocides and build, international institutions. And you really turned to me instead into a health law scholar. So that is the opportunity cost. So we're like... The world is down one human rights scholar and plus one health law scholar. You judge whether that's a net benefit. I will say what I love about health law, and a choice like that is almost existential. You eventually decide where you feel like you'll have a lever, a chance, an Archimedean point to make some progress. And I found health law and bioethics and biotechnology to be especially exciting because there's actually a lot of problems to solve, and not just one big profound one like how to stop genocides. And I found that they were wonderfully interdisciplinary, that I got to learn a little bit of science about, whether statins really do work, or how GLP-1s actually affect, weight or even inflammation. There's also, you can put on your philosopher's hat and really think about, autonomy and what it means to be a human, or a concept that we were wrestling with back then was, what is human dignity? There's profound psychological questions too, like how do you engender trust? Not as an ephemeral notion in the sky, but like how do you make someone decide to put that product in their body? Like what are the actual factors? And of course there are both microeconomic questions, like the book I wrote is about how copays change consumption behaviors, but also macroeconomic ones, like how do we keep growing an economy to support an aging population. And so I found health law is so much fun because you get to nerd out and collaborate with people from all over the university in a way that I find really fulfilling and really exciting, and really thankful that you brought me into this field and really supported every step of my career. So I'll just mention that now I'm teaching a class called Science for Lawyers, and it's a reading group, and we're trying to think about some of the foundations. And the first class paper I asked them to read was the first paper I wrote here. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was a randomized study of how doctors read scientific articles, how they interpret abstracts, and specifically the role of of industry conflicts of interest. That was a hot topic back when the Petrie-Flom Center was founded. The IOM had Instant Medicine, had a big report about conflicts of interest in science and medicine. All the top journals had editorials about it. Everyone was talking about conflicts of interest. And that topic, I don't know if you noticed, it kind of faded in importance. And it's now, but we didn't solve really any of the problems. We didn't get the conflict of interest disclosures on scientific journal abstracts that we proposed in our work. But it's kind of come back, right? It's become a pretext for a lot of the dismantling we're now seeing. A lot of the claims that you can't trust any biomedical science because of the conflicts of interest. So I do see this looping back problem that we need to sort of solve.
So I also have to echo others in saying I'm just really delighted to be here, to be able to celebrate the Petrie-Flom Center, and it has played a very big role in my professional life too. I didn't know that you were going to say that, Chris, but it's good that I follow you because I actually am an international human rights lawyer, and I've stuck with that. So I following the pattern that Susanna and Carmel have set out, I want to talk about the first three kind of stages of my relationship with Petrie-Flom. The first was as an academic fellow. I don't know how to do math, but I was the first Joseph H. Flom Fellow on Global Health and Rights, and I started in 2007. So it's not quite 20 years, and that was just an incredible opportunity, which I used to edit a collective volume on health rights litigation around the world, co-edited it with a colleague from Norway, and it was really the first comparative study of what happens when health rights are constitutionalized and judicially enforceable, which in the United States we don't tend to grapple with, but it is the case in over 180 countries around the world, including now in some very, very low income countries like Uganda. So that was an opportunity to look at not just whether this is good or bad, but under what circumstances and institutional arrangements constitutionalizing and judicially enforcing health rights can improve equity in health systems systemically, and when it doesn't. And as a result of that, a whole lot of other things happened. My family then moved to East Africa for years. I was the first non-Kenyan appointed to the Implementation Commission of the Kenyan Constitution that enshrined health rights. I was the first non-Colombian appointed as an expert on the implementation of a very large structural judgment that led to the overhaul of the Colombian health system. A lot of work with judiciaries around the world, and in health rights enforcement, that doesn't just mean specific resolutions of health disputes, but also, for example, introducing the use of amicus briefs in Uganda, which had not been a practice before, looking at more structural remedies in Kenya. Issues like that. I've done many, many amicus briefs in some cases here, like the Dobbs case, but also around the world when Colombia legalized abortion, Mexico's work on abortion as well at the Supreme Court level, and it's also led to great collaborations across Harvard with the David Rockefeller Center on Latin American Studies, for example. We've had, as Glenn mentioned, High Court justices come and speak to us about different landmark judgments. So that was the first phase of the work. The second one was when I returned from a visiting professorship at Georgetown Law Center and became a senior fellow, and started the Global Health and Rights Project. And that was right before the pandemic broke out, which immediately kind of led to my working much more dramatically on global health law. So I contributed to a volume that Carmel and Glenn edited on COVID-19 in the law. But one of the principal activities was working on an international commission of jurists. In international law, as many of you no doubt know, there's something called an expert consensus of internationally acclaimed jurists that can fill in gaps. And there were a lot of gaps that we discovered, normative gaps in international law when COVID-19 spread. So there was an ICJ initiative to convene these jurists on human rights and pandemic emergencies. And that then fed into another series of activities in terms of advising and weighing in on the amendments to the international health regulations that were reformed in 2024, and then of course the pandemic treaty. As well as creating institutions, I co-founded a global health law consortium, an interest group at the American Society of International Law, became part of the founding editorial board of a journal on global health law. So a lot of different creations of fields. And now turning to the here and now, the administration not only has upended the public health infrastructure in this country, but as Sam mentioned, as Rochelle alluded to, they've also upended the global order and global governance for health. And that has, even before the administration, I was very happily working on an interfaculty working group through the Harvard Global Health Institute and Petrie-Flom on global health governance with faculty from across the university, which, as has been mentioned, is so important. But now in this period, we have used that working group to convene experts in the field, which led to some small things, publishing global policy, and is now leading to much more in-depth work, and also spawning other projects, participating in convenings that are happening with the Clinton Global Initiative and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Wellcome Trust, now on reimagining global health governance in ways that address some of the structural problems that existed before this administration took power, as well as the total debacle that has been created. And I'll stop there. I just want to thank Glenn in particular before I stop. There are many ways to lead a faculty center, and in my opinion, Glenn has the Goldilocks touch. He's neither too overly structured and top-down, nor just anything goes, but just will support creativity and make Petrie-Flom the land of yes. So thank you.
Hi, I will start similarly and just say I am so grateful to be on this panel. Carmel and Glenn and Susanna, I feel like I'm very much among giants here today, so I really appreciate the chance to be here. When I think about sort of my relationship with Petrie-Flom and how it's evolved over time, I think back 20 years, and in September of 2005, I had just finished a master's in ethics at Yale Divinity School, where I had focused on bioethics issues. I had been married for 3 months, and I had enrolled in a post-baccalaureate pre-med program at Yale College while my wife was at the nursing school. And I remember distinctly the day when I was in the organic chemistry lab. My goggles were fogged. I poured the wrong 2 solutions together, and there was this big explosion on the lab bench. And the 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds around me were sort of aghast at what I had done. And I remember vividly whether it was that day or the next day, being in our little apartment in New Haven and sort of trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do with these interests that I had. And I remember stumbling on the Petrie-Flom Center website and seeing that there was a center that was launching at Harvard Law School that was really focusing on the issues that I found so compelling and important. And so, my law school journey kind of started there, and I ended up going to Berkeley for law school, and then had the opportunity to be a visiting student here at Harvard as part of the Berkeley-Harvard Exchange Program as a 3L, where I had the chance to be a student with Carmel in one of the Petrie-Flom sponsored courses at the law school at the time. And there have been many different ways that my path has just sort of continued to intersect with Petrie-Flom over the course of my career in private practice. Carmel and I were in the trenches together at Ropes and Gray back in the day, working on health law issues. And for me, what has really driven me professionally is the ability and the opportunity to really work with clients in the healthcare and life sciences spaces on their biggest problems, their biggest regulatory problems, whether it's with an agency like HHS or an enforcement matter with the DOJ or a state attorney general's office. That's really what I spend my time doing now. But it's always, for me, been grounded in the things that this center I know is so focused on, which are that when we're talking about health and when we're working on issues related to health, we're working on the issues that cut to the core of who we are as human beings. And what gets me out of bed in the morning to go and do the work that I do is that in some small way, not all, but most of the clients that I'm working with are really focused on those same goals. When I think about sort of the current moment in health law and policy and sort of where we are and where we're going, I'll say for me, what continues to fascinate me is the deep and complicated set of relationships that really are embedded within the healthcare delivery supply chain. And that's not just sort of drugs and devices and how those things make their way into the lives of patients, but those players, along with our large health systems, our academic centers, our new technology-driven modes of care, and all of the intermediaries that are embedded in the system, it's both fascinating and complicated, and I think it's also the root of many of our challenges. So I think when I think about what's broken right now, and also what gives me hope about what we can do, what I find really interesting and really important is sort of taking if you imagine a supercomputer and you take the back off the computer and you look at all of the connections, and then you try to figure out what are the economic incentives that are embedded in these different arrangements within our supply chain. And then if we can be honest about what those incentives are, we can then think about how they need to be different. What do we need to change? What are the incentives that we're actually not even aware of that are influencing behavior that has a big impact on the way healthcare gets delivered in this country? So those are the things that I'm thinking about, and I feel like being able to be here at this particular moment in time for me, 20 years after my relationship in whatever form or fashion started with Petrie-Flom, it feels to me like a homecoming because I have the chance to talk and interact with people that are focused on so many important things. So thank you, and I appreciate the chance to be here.
I'm fair enough to put the timer on myself as well. So, to talk about my first encounter with Petrie-Flom, it started actually with my admission letter to Harvard Law School when the then Dean of Admission hand wrote on it, "The Petrie-Flom Center will be so happy to have you." It then continued, I've told that story before, I haven't told this part of the story, which is that Columbia offered me a full scholarship, and I went to their open house, and I met with a professor who was the head of their law, science, and technology program to say, I really want to do health law. And he looked at me and he said, if you get into Harvard Law School, you should go. They had the Petrie-Flom Center. So I took his advice. My parents are still a little upset about that. And I came here to Harvard Law School, and I have not regretted it, even when I think about the financial cost of that. And I don't regret it in part because I was of the generation that wasn't lucky enough to have Einar at the helm, but it was the first year of Glenn, along with Ben, which was great rhyming. And having Glenn as a mentor, both while I was a student and throughout my career, has been such an incredible joy and blessing. As a law student, he made a really big place feel like home, something that I feel really privileged to be able to do with my own students. Professionally, he's taught me so much. I constantly quote him saying, if you're going to take the time to learn a subject, you need to publish at least 3 papers out of that research. I've also learned from him how to manage teams, how to hire good people and give them the trust that they can make good decisions, even if those decisions aren't exactly the decisions that you would make. Like when Glenn went on his honeymoon and came back, and I had made the decision that Petrie-Flom wouldn't serve soda at any of their events. So we actually used to hide a can of Diet Coke, of Coke Zero, just for Glenn. He was the exception to the no soda. But there is soda now, so it's a different era. But after law school, I went and I practiced for a little bit with David Tolley, who got me on a due diligence and doc review project at the same time, which is perhaps why we were sitting at opposite ends of the table. And I practiced for a while, and then I was lucky enough that Holly and Glenn entrusted me with their baby, with Petrie-Flom that they had taken from Einar. They built into something that was really, really beautiful and cool and hosted such interesting people and interesting discussions. And when I got there, it was this very special moment where the subject of AI in healthcare was blowing up, and Petrie-Flom, because of Glenn and Holly and Timo, happened to land a grant on that topic just like a couple years before everybody else discovered this topic. And I have been chasing that high of nailing that grant a year or 2 before everybody else ever since then. And we've had a lot of fun with it. For example, launching the Law and Psychedelics project, which was named Poplar, where I told Glenn, well, it's above my pay grade to tell the dean that we want to study psychedelics. That's a you job. And Glenn did that to really feeling like this job was so fun because Petrie-Flom is the spider, the center of the spider web that is health law, where people would come to us with such interesting ideas. So, for example, when Chris said, hey, we really need a book on health law as private law. So cool, so fun, let's do it. We had people come and say, we want to do things on value-based care, we want to do things on research. We had one event that was magic for bioethics, which I'm sure is in the archive somewhere and was incredibly cool. And it meant that I got to meet so many amazing people, and I miss being able to sit in that little yellow house at 23 Everett and feel like everybody was coming to be really excited and be part of the health law community in such a special way. So I only have a minute left, and I will reflect on where I think the field is going. And here, like, you'll be able to really exactly date me in terms of age, because I was a baby lawyer when the ACA was this novel chapter in healthcare reform, and that was immensely exciting. Like, what a privilege to get a law that none of the partners at the law firm could tell me that they knew better than me, because it was so new. But it was also revolutionary because it really changed Medicaid to be something of a real safety net in this country, which we hadn't really had before, at least in the states that accepted expansion. And then I spent some pivotal years working in patient advocacy at the time that there was a push to repeal the ACA, and feeling like with John McCain's thumb, like we had won, and that there was a real promise to Americans that if they were sick, there was going to be a way for them to access healthcare. And I think unfortunately right now, we're living in an age where that promise is really being walked back with the budget reconciliation bill, with the implementation of work requirements. It's really going to change, and people won't be able to count on that promise. And this is something I think about a lot. I also think about the fact that the ACA now is kind of an old car that has had some tune-ups, but that maybe because of COVID, who knows, we sort of missed the natural point where we would have written the next chapter in healthcare reform. And so I think a lot in my work about, okay, how do we react not just to what's happening now, but how do we answer the question of what is that next chapter? And I'm only able to do that because of the amazing work of Petrie-Flom, of the people on this panel, you guys, and especially of Glenn. So with that, we are going to open it to questions, reflections from the audience.
I'm curious about the magic show. Was there actually a magician? Were there rabbits, hats?
Yes, on Zoom even. I know, that makes it even more exciting. Yeah, no, it was very interesting. It was like how the brain processes information.
Thanks you all, this was great. I'm really curious about, it seems like in health law we have a lot of, like a kind of an epistemological crisis right now. A crisis maybe, or some people might really like it, but just with side A saying here's a lot of facts backing this up, here's side B saying here's a lot of facts backing it up, and those are often kind of incongruent. As people who have helped to train other people about health law, have you had any success stories or advice on how to get, I guess, like kind of reconcile intellectual differences in that and get people from different sides to kind of see each other's sides and get some agreement on that?
It's not quite what you were asking about, because it's not, the example that I have in mind is not one where people were not trusting the same facts. But a microcosm of this sometimes comes up when we see debates about how FDA should regulate new drugs, especially for serious and life-threatening conditions. And so I have had personal experience with patient advocates in the ALS community who said, you don't have ALS, with all due respect, we don't care what you have to say, right? You might be an expert in this area of law, or you might have other examples, but if you were in our shoes, you would want the same thing. And some people, are unwilling to come to the same table, but I did have the experience with some members of that community where I learned from them, right, about things that had been tried, things that had been promised by industry, things that had been promised in their minds from some policymakers, and they were able to learn from me, right? How would what you're arguing for pan out if FDA really did approve things where we had no evidence that they were beneficial? Would that truly be what your community wants? Would that be good for patients in the future? You know, kind of the basic philosophical principle of kind of universalize that and see what would happen. And we now have a quite productive relationship. So it's very cliche to say, but you kind of like sit down and talk with people, figure out where your points of overlap are. And I've had some success with that, but increasingly, right, when you're at such different starting points, you're getting your news from completely different outlets. You know, your facts are, I can't even say your facts are completely different, but in the sense that on one side it's not facts at all, right? And the other side there's evidence to kind of back things up. I am not as hopeful that we're going to be able to reach a middle ground in these extreme circumstances that we're seeing now.
I mean, I will say that I think it's helpful to acknowledge when there is a true epistemic difference in the level of evidence we have. And I think some folks in the last, during COVID and since, have been hesitant to really be candid about where the evidence is actually strong and where the evidence is weak. And to give an example of that, you know, there's a real difference in the public health interventions that, say, blue state governors used versus red state governors used during COVID. And the evidence is pretty clear that the blue state governors saved, on net, about 75,000 lives through this package of interventions. Vaccine mandates were a big part of that package, but so were some, and the evidence is super clear they worked, both the mandate and the underlying vaccine. But frankly, the evidence for having people walk around wearing surgical masks when they're outside, like Brookline actually had a mandate that if you took a walk outside, you had to wear a surgical mask. Turns out the evidence for that, last time I checked a couple years ago, suggested that was not at all effective, in fact, neither on the micro surgical mask level, nor at the level of a population mandate. Likewise, the school closures probably didn't save a whole lot of lives. And so I think being candid about where the strength was, the science was strong, and recognizing the decisions were being made on an emergency basis too, and most people were working in good faith. But I also think that's true in a lot of places. Biomedical science is not as strong as we would hope for it to be. We still have replication problems. We still have trials that don't actually comply with the clinicaltrials.org requirement to release your results. So there's sorts of things where the evidence, simplistic suggestions that you either follow the evidence or you don't, I think might actually be unhelpful as part of what's driving us into these epistemic silos.
Hi, thank you all for that great panel. As someone who's just starting my Petrie-Flom journey, just the last couple of years, it's very cool to see how it's shaped all of your careers. I wanted to ask about what seems to be sort of like the butt of the joke, which is psychedelics. Because I'm currently a fellow working with the psychedelic projects and focusing on psychedelic and spirituality. And I will say, you know, me myself, my background is religious studies. I have an MDiv, I studied religion and tax. And so I found myself at Petrie-Flom because this is where the psychedelic work is being done. And so I maybe share the skepticism of, you know, whether or not psychedelics belongs here or what it's doing here or how effective, thinking about psychedelics in this healthcare model is. All that said, psychedelics is actually an area where this current administration is like super jazzed and excited. At least they're excited about talking about it. I'm not sure about doing it. And in terms of like implementing, changing the status, all of that, I can make a psychedelic joke too. All that to say, I have opinions about whether it would be good or bad if HHS and FDA, moved on psychedelics, but I want to know what any of you think.
So I feel like your question encompassed a whole bunch of great questions, Victoria. It was both sort of what should the FDA do right now, but it was also a question about like, how did Petrie-Flom come to have what now feels like a signature initiative, which is the study of law and psychedelics. And so there, I can say, because I was around for the birth of that, first of all, I want to give credit to Mason Marks, who's been a key part of that and was really flagging, hey, there's a discussion here to be had. But then I would always joke that I was like the most boring person in psychedelics. I mean, I'm the person that on Friday night, my husband is like, we're not opening a bottle of wine because you'll drink half a glass and then I'll have to drink the rest of the bottle. Is that there was so many interesting threads being woven there. Because as you picked up, some people look at psychedelics and they see a really medicalized model, which felt kind of comfortable for Petrie-Flom to be in, because Petrie-Flom is in the business of understanding what's going on with the FDA and medical research and pharmaceuticals. But there was also this deep sense of this might be a tool to understand the human condition and to provide people with some sense of peace, spirituality, relief that they haven't found an avenue to, and maybe that doesn't have to exist within the medicalized model. And there's a whole conversation to be had about health versus wellness and how people approach how to be a human in the least painful, most enjoyable, best way possible during our time. And I thought that having a space to do that in a really thoughtful way and bring thoughtful people who may not agree with each other. Because some people might say it shouldn't be medicalized. We're missing something when we medicalize it. And some people will say, I feel like safety-wise, like it needs to be like that. And I think what Petrie-Flom does really well is that convening function, where it brings people who feel kind of uncomfortable sitting at the table to sit at the table together, and I felt like that was a great topic for psychedelics. Well, getting Danny's steps in.
So a couple of things that have been mentioned are, one, like writing a new chapter in the ACA that didn't seem to happen, and then, talking about maybe there's some evidence that is strong or weaker and really looking deeper at the science. My question is a little bit broader than just psychedelics, but is there any area of healthcare where you're hearing whisperings or you're hearing, you just are noticing gaps that is ripe for innovation within policy, within law, especially as if you're thinking of looking ahead, looking past the maybe current crises and thinking, where is this technological development going to converge with, maybe we can start working on something now and meet it at its head?
I think one area that several of us have worked on is telehealth. And it's one of those things like self-driving cars, like Elon Musk has been saying for a decade. Next year we will have like true full self-driving. That's still not here. I feel that way about telehealth. Like we've had the basic technology for synchronous video full on, and we still have state-by-state licensing laws that are getting in the way of access, that should bring down prices and increase access. And I think there's a good argument that all the state licensing laws actually violate the Dormant Commerce Clause, but it just sticks around. And so that's a place that I think it's a low-hanging fruit that we could make a big difference for a lot of people, and it not just be on the margins. Like, yes, if you want a prescription for like, a hair thinner pill, you can get that through telehealth. But if you actually have a real problem that you need regular health care for, you probably can't get it through telehealth. And I think that's there's still space for that, even though it's not all that novel. There's still space for innovation in that space.
Yeah, I guess I would add, I think what I see a lot in my own practice is all the different ways that we're able to make care accessible, separate and apart from the physician. And obviously that's something that we've been doing for a very long time in lots of different ways, but bringing care into the home, robotics that can do things that human beings used to have to do, but now they don't have to, just making care accessible in ways that get people to it, I think there's a lot there and a lot of innovation.
I'm from biology department. I have one comment and one not serious question to Christopher. My compliment to Carmel for choosing Harvard because, in my opinion, it brings out the best from an academic person. So congratulations to you and compliment.
Thank you, I'm still excited I got in.
And a very unserious question to Christopher. Sometime in 1970s, a microbiologist in California published a few articles with a co-author, and subsequently it was found that the co-author is actually her dog. So the editor became furious and prevented her from further publication in his journal. So since you mentioned about your dog in the beginning of your talk, did you publish any article with any co-author?
No, I've not published with my dog. In fact, no, and the dog's not really named Flamisha either.
Okay, so I think our time is coming to an end, and I would like to hand it over to Susanna, who's going to wrap things up.
First, I just want to give a round of applause to this council. Before I turn the mic back over to Glenn to close us out, I just want to offer you three things. An invitation, a little bit of breaking news, and an explanation of some gifts. So first I want to invite all of you to join us this year, this upcoming year, for what promises to be a really remarkable year of events. We will explore topics like how old is too old to govern? State law and policymaking around psychedelics, moral conscience and healthcare law, and comparative international approaches to AI. Thank you, Carmel and Glenn, for pinpointing that issue early. Approaches to AI in healthcare. So the breaking news, too, is around events. So I want to announce the Petrie-Flom 2026 Annual Conference and Book Project. You've heard about some of our past ones tonight. Will be on embryo law and ethics in collaboration with Carter Sneed at the University of Notre Dame and Judith Darr at North Kentucky University Chase College of Law. Keep your eyes out, a call for abstracts will be issued soon. Finally, during the reception that will follow Glenn's closing, we want to invite you to join us in the room next door, Milstein West. We have special 20th anniversary screen cloths, which in 2005 you might have used on your BlackBerry or your Palm Pilot, if you remember that. And second, as you all know from our long name, the Petrie-Flom Center contains multitudes and multiple areas of research, multiple perspectives, and a multidisciplinary approach. When I interviewed for this job, I can't remember if it was Carmel or Glenn who told me that being at Petrie-Flom requires being something of a multi-tool. You are always switching gears, you are always using different skills, and there is always a lot going on. And so our special anniversary swag is also this lovely multi-tool, which includes a stylus, a flashlight, a pen, 2 screwdrivers, and a compass to help us all find our way in the upcoming months and years. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Glenn. Thank you.
I heard there was a stylist in the room and I got really excited, and then I realized I misheard it. So right when we end, I'm going to walk down like the bridegroom. I'm going to walk down the aisle to the other room, so you'll all come with me. We'll have a step and repeat there if you want to enjoy, get a photo. This was amazing. The whole evening was amazing. I guess I moved a little bit. I mean, it's quite moved at many points, but I moved a little bit about thinking about children. I don't have any, but thinking about both people who you help in life and encounter in life, but also ideas as children. And I was thinking to myself, first of all, if you have a healthy parenting style, they leave you. And that's actually a good thing that they leave you and they do their own thing. Second thing is if you're a really good parent, actually they do better than you do, and you really watch them and you admire them. But then the last thing is a little bit sad. I was thinking about Khalil Gibran, who wrote on children, their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you may not visit even in your dreams. And this idea, this real sadness, there will always be this gulf. But if you're really, really lucky, they come back and visit you a lot of the time. So I'm really glad for all the people and the ideas that have come back to visit. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the reception.